The rhythmic bounce of Marcus Johnson's basketball echoed through the tree-lined streets of Green Meadows, a sound as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Fresh from basketball practice, his Nike Air Zooms still squeaked with remnants of gymnasium floor, and his practice jersey clung to his athletic frame beneath his gray hoodie. The late autumn sun painted long shadows across meticulously maintained lawns, where sprinklers whirred in perfect synchronization despite the recent rainfall. At 15, Marcus carried himself with the distinctive poise of someone who'd grown up in the public eye. Being the mayor's son meant learning early that every gesture, every expression, could end up on someone's social media feed. Even now, exhausted from Coach Thompson's brutal three-point drills, he maintained what his mother jokingly called his campaign smile as he passed Mr. Reeves tending to his prize roses. His phone buzzed in his pocket. The third time in 10 minutes. Marcus knew without looking it would be his mom. Diana Johnson might be handling the city's multi-million-dollar budget, but she never lost track of her son's schedule. He pulled out his phone, droplets of sweat from practice still cooling on his brow. Don't forget, campaign dinner tonight. Business casual. And yes, that means no basketball shorts. Marcus grinned, typing back a quick "got it." Already practiced my firm handshake and voter-friendly smile. He could almost hear his mother's eye roll through the phone. The reply came instantly. Less sass, more class, young man. Love you. The exchange warmed him despite the crisp October air. His mom had somehow mastered being both the city's first black female mayor and an ever-present force in his life. Between her duties and his packed schedule of AP classes, basketball, and the youth leadership program she'd insisted he join, their shared dinners had become sacred time. Even when those dinners involved potential donors and endless small talk about municipal bonds. Cutting through Cedar Lane shortened his walk home by 10 minutes, crucial time he needed for the AP history test looming tomorrow. Marcus felt prepared. He'd been up late studying the civil rights movement, finding himself especially drawn to the stories of young activists not much older than himself. His mother had caught him at midnight, still poring over his textbook, and shared stories of her own childhood, of her parents' involvement in local politics, of why she'd chosen public service despite its costs. The houses here in Green Meadows told their own stories of privilege: Tesla charging stations, manicured hedges, and security cameras that blinked at regular intervals. Marcus had grown up watching this neighborhood transform, as old money met new technology, and diversity moved at a slower pace than property values. Some neighbors, like the Paddles next door and the Rodriguezes down the block, had become like extended family. Others still did double takes when they saw him walking home alone. His basketball hit a groove in the sidewalk, bouncing off rhythm and rolling toward a pristine white fence. As Marcus jogged to retrieve it, he mentally reviewed his history notes. The personal becomes political, his teacher had said, discussing how individual acts of courage had sparked national change. He scooped up the ball, spinning it on one finger, a trick that had taken him 3 summers to master. The late afternoon light caught his championship ring from last season's state finals, sending small rainbows dancing across the fence. Coach Thompson had pulled him aside after practice today, talking seriously about college scouts and future possibilities. Keep your head up, eyes forward, and remember, you're playing for more than just points, he'd said, in that way he had of making basketball sound like life itself. Marcus checked his phone again. 4:45 p.m. If he hurried, he'd have time to shower before helping his mom prep for tonight's dinner. He increased his pace, unaware that ordinary afternoons could turn extraordinary in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Patricia Wheeler's afternoon ritual remained unchanged since moving to Green Meadows 3 months ago. Earl Grey tea in her grandmother's bone china cup, property listings spread across her marble kitchen island, and the neighborhood watch app quietly pinging updates on her iPad. As a successful real estate agent, she prided herself on knowing every detail of her new community: property values, school rankings, and what she called demographic trends. The Ring doorbell chimed its familiar electronic tone. Patricia's manicured fingers swiped to the live feed, her tea forgotten as she watched a tall black teenager in a gray hoodie pass by her carefully landscaped front yard. Her pulse quickened. This was the third unfamiliar face this week, and the neighborhood chat group had been buzzing about a series of break-ins 2 towns over. The facts blurred in her mind. Teenagers, hoodies, suspicious behavior. The basketball in his hands registered as an afterthought. Better safe than sorry, she whispered to herself, a mantra inherited from her mother, along with the China tea set and a worldview that saw danger in difference. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her iPhone 15 Pro Max, its screen reflecting her perfectly highlighted hair and the uncertainty in her eyes. The 911 operator's voice came through, professional and detached. 911. What's your emergency? Patricia's voice transformed, sliding from her real estate agent's warm tone to something higher, urgent. Yes, hello. I'm calling from 1542 Cedar Lane in Green Meadows. There's a suspicious person. She paused, watching Marcus through her bay window. A threatening presence. A large young man in a hoodie. He's been circling the neighborhood. The lie slipped out easily. Fear making fiction feel like fact. Outside, Marcus felt the weight of eyes on his back. Years of his mother's careful coaching flickered through his mind. Keep your hands visible. Move slowly. Stay calm. The basketball suddenly felt heavy in his grip. He'd grown up watching his mother navigate spaces like this. Council meetings where she was the only black face. Fundraisers where donors mistook her for the help until they read her name tag. Dignity is armor, she always said. Patricia's voice rose as she paced behind her custom-draped windows. He's just standing there now. I don't recognize him. This is a private neighborhood. The operator asked for a description, and Patricia found herself emphasizing certain words. Large, dark hoodie, African American. Each phrase carried the weight of implicit bias she'd never acknowledge. Through the window, she watched Marcus pull out his phone. Was he calling accomplices? Her heart raced faster. The neighborhood chat group exploded with notifications as she messaged them. Called 911 about suspicious youth on Cedar Lane. Stay alert. Marcus stared at his mom's text. Don't forget to pick up your suit from the dry cleaners before the dinner. While trying to ignore the now familiar sensation of being washed, Coach Thompson's words from practice echoed in his head. Stay focused under pressure. Different context, same principle. He squared his shoulders, adjusted his backpack, and continued walking, each step measured and deliberate. In her kitchen, Patricia's iPad pinged with responses from neighbors. Good call. Can't be too careful these days. Did you get a photo? And then, a lone dissenting voice. Maybe he lives here. We should ask before calling police. But Patricia had already crossed her emotional Rubicon. Through the window, she watched 2 police cruisers turn onto Cedar Lane, their arrival transforming her quiet street into something else entirely. Relief endowed ward in her chest as she straightened her Lululemon yoga pants and prepared to meet the officers. Out on the sidewalk, Marcus heard the sirens before he saw the flashing lights. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, probably his mom checking about the suit, but he couldn't reach for it now. He'd been trained for this moment, but knowing the script didn't make it easier to perform. The basketball slipped from his fingers, rolling toward the gutter as red and blue lights painted shadows across the perfect lawns of Green Meadows. The police cruisers transformed Cedar Lane into an impromptu stage, their swirling lights casting alternating shadows of red and blue across the perfectly trimmed hedges. Officer James Reynolds, a 12-year veteran of the force, approached with measured steps, his right hand resting on his holster, a gesture so habitual he no longer noticed it. His partner, Officer Sarah Chen, positioned herself on the flank, her body camera's red light blinking steadily. Hands where I can see them. Reynolds called out, his voice carrying across manicured lawns where neighbors had begun to emerge, drawn by the commotion. Marcus raised his arms slowly, painfully aware of how his 6'2" basketball player's frame might appear to others. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Slow movements, clear responses, no sudden gestures. Across the street, 16-year-old Lily Martinez already had her phone out, Instagram live running. They're stopping someone on Cedar Lane, she narrated, her follower count climbing rapidly. Oh my God, wait, I think that's Marcus Johnson. He's in my AP history class. The comments section exploded. Mayor's son. What's happening? Recording everything. Officer Reynolds felt a bead of sweat roll down his back despite the autumn chill. Can you identify yourself, young man? The words came out harsher than intended, his training warring with a growing sense of unease. He'd worked security at the mayor's inauguration 2 years ago, had seen this same teenager in a suit and tie. My name is Marcus Johnson, Marcus responded, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I live at 1728 Maple Drive, just 3 blocks from here. I'm walking home from basketball practice. His abandoned basketball rolled lazily toward Officer Chen, who stopped it with her foot, her expression unreadable. Patricia Wheeler stood on her front lawn now, her Earl Grey tea growing cold on the kitchen counter. The scene before her didn't match the threat she'd constructed in her mind. The suspicious person was clearly a teenager, his school backpack still slung over one shoulder, wearing what she now recognized as their city's prestigious Washington Prep athletic gear. More phones appeared in windows and doorways. Mrs. Patel, wrapping her dupatta tighter against the cold, stepped onto her porch. That's Diana's boy, she called out, her voice carrying the weight of certainty. He walks this way every Tuesday and Thursday after practice. The live stream count hit 4 digits. Lily's voice trembled as she continued narrating. They'd got him standing there with his hands up. Everyone knows Marcus. He's literally the mayor's son. He tutors kids at the community center. This is insane. Officer Chen's radio crackled. Dispatch, we're going to need to verify. She paused, watching Reynolds' face shift as recognition finally settled in. The red light on her body camera seemed to pulse more intensely, recording every second of what was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare. Marcus kept his hands raised, remembering countless dinner conversations about moments exactly like this. His mother had prepared him. But the reality, standing exposed on a suburban street, watched and judged, felt surreal. My student ID is in my front pocket, he said calmly. My mother is Mayor Diana Johnson. You can call her office to verify. A new wave of murmurs swept through the growing crowd. Someone in the back shouted, "That's Mayor Johnson's son." The phrase rippled through the audience, transforming the atmosphere from suspense to embarrassment. Patricia Wheeler's face drained of color as she scrolled through her phone, finding a recent newspaper article featuring the mayor and her son at a community event. Officer Reynolds lowered his hand from his holster, but the damage was done. Dozens of phones captured every micro-expression, every gesture. Lily's Instagram live counter ticked past 5,000 viewers, her comments section a blur of outrage and disbelief. The late afternoon sun caught Marcus's championship ring as he kept his hands raised, turning it into a beacon that seemed to mock the entire situation. No one noticed Officer Chen touching her radio again, this time with urgent purpose. But they all heard the approaching siren that signaled this scene was about to change dramatically. Mayor Diana Johnson stood before the city council, her silk blazer catching the fluorescent light as she gestured toward the projected slides behind her. The Affordable Housing Initiative had been her passion project for months, a carefully crafted plan to bridge the growing economic divide in their city. Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd learned to command rooms long before she held official power. The data shows that mixed-income developments actually increased property values while fostering community integration, she explained, noting the subtle shift in council members' expressions. After 2 terms as mayor, she could read their micro-reactions like a familiar book. The conservative bloc's skepticism, the progressives' cautious optimism, the undecided middle waiting to see which way the political winds would blow. Her phone vibrated for the 5th time in 20 minutes, face down on the podium. Diana had trained herself to ignore such interruptions during crucial presentations, but something felt different about these calls. Her assistant, Rachel, stood at the chamber door, her normally composed face tight with concern. Their eyes met briefly, and Diana felt her stomach drop before her professional mask could register the change. As you can see from the projected 10-year impact analysis, the words caught in her throat as Rachel discreetly held up her phone, mouthing one word, Marcus. The laser pointer trembled almost imperceptibly in Diana's hand. Councilman Gregory Wells, never one to miss an opportunity, leaned forward. Madam Mayor, about these projected costs. Diana's focus narrowed to the text message now visible on her own phone screen. Police incident on Cedar Lane. Marcus involved. He's okay, but... The rest of the message blurred as 15 years of warnings, preparations, and carefully contained fears crystallized into this moment. I apologize, she said, her voice cutting through Wells's question with the precision of a surgeon's blade. We'll need to recess. The council chamber erupted in murmurs. Diana was known for her rigorous adherence to procedure, her ability to sit through marathon sessions without a break. This was unprecedented. Diana. Councilwoman Martinez called out, gesturing at the budget spreadsheets still projected on the wall. We need to vote on the funding allocation today. The deadline. Diana turned back, one hand already gathering her papers, the other gripping her phone like a lifeline. The chamber fell silent as she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of both public servant and private citizen. My son needs me more than your parking ordinance needs my vote. The silence held as she strode toward the door, her heels clicking against marble in a rhythm that matched her racing heart. Rachel fell into step beside her, already calling for the car. It's being live-streamed, she reported in low tones. Social media is picking it up. Channel 8 has a crew heading there now. In the elevator, Diana allowed herself 3 deep breaths, a ritual her mother had taught her decades ago. When the world demands your anger, Mom had said, give them your dignity instead. But this was Marcus, her son. The child she taught to raise his hands slowly if stopped, to keep his school ID always accessible, to swallow his pride when dignity was a luxury they couldn't afford. The executive parking garage felt miles long as she walked to her city-issued SUV, Rachel coordinating with their communications team on a second phone. Diana caught fragments of their damage control. No comment yet. Mayor is aware of the situation. Ask witnesses to please respect privacy. As her driver, Keith, held the car door, Diana heard the police scanner crackle from the front seat. Be advised, situation on Cedar Lane involves the mayor's son. Mayor Johnson is en route. The formal language couldn't mask the tension in the dispatcher's voice. Diana checked her reflection in the tinted window. A habit born of countless public appearances. Her pearls hung straight, her blazer unwrinkled, her expression composed. But her hands, out of public view, gripped her leather portfolio until her knuckles went white. Cedar Lane, she instructed Keith, who was already pulling out of the garage. As they accelerated through downtown, Diana silently rehearsed every speech she'd ever given about justice and equality. None of them seemed adequate for what awaited her 3 blocks from home. The mayor's black SUV took the corner onto Cedar Lane with practiced precision, its government plates catching the late afternoon sun. Inside, Diana Johnson had already switched from her normal phone to her official device, knowing every call and text would be subject to public records requests by morning. The vehicle's tires crunched over Marcus's abandoned basketball as they pulled up to the scene. The crowd parted instinctively as Diana emerged, her campaign smile nowhere in sight. Her Manolo Blahniks clicked against the pavement in a rhythm that seemed to echo her heartbeat, her pearl necklace swaying with each determined step. The whispers rippled through the gathered onlookers. It's really her, the mayor herself. Oh, Patricia's done it now. Officer Reynolds's spine straightened so quickly his radio squawked in protest. He'd seen Mayor Johnson handle press conferences, budget crises, and natural disasters, But never had he seen this particular expression on her face, the perfect intersection of maternal fury and political power. His hand, which had finally left his holster, twitched nervously at his side. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice carrying an odd mixture of relief and embarrassment. His hands were still raised, though Officer Chen had begun to step back, her body camera capturing every second of what would undoubtedly become a viral moment. Patricia Wheeler stood frozen on her immaculate lawn, suddenly aware that her Lululemon yoga pants and designer sweater felt inadequate for this confrontation. She recognized the mayor not just from the campaign billboards that still dotted the city, but from last month's Homes and Gardens feature about powerful women transforming local politics. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Someone," Diana said, her voice carrying down the street without her having to raise it, "want to explain why my son can't walk home in his own neighborhood?" The question hung in the air like smoke, threading through the crowd and settling heavily on Patricia's shoulders. Officer Reynolds cleared his throat. "Mayor Johnson, we were responding to a call about a suspicious person," Diana finished for him, each syllable precisely enunciated. "In a Washington Prep Letterman jacket, with a basketball, 3 blocks from the home he's lived in since he was born." She turned slowly, taking in the scene. The police cruisers with lights still flashing, the neighbors with phones raised, Patricia Wheeler's rapidly paling face. Lily Martinez's Instagram live count had hit 20,000. Her shaking hands captured every moment as Mayor Johnson walked directly to her son, straightened his jacket with the same gentle motion she'd used when fixing his tie for his first school debate, then turned to face Patricia Wheeler. "Ms. Wheeler," Diana said, recognizing the woman from neighborhood association meetings she pointedly avoided. "I believe we've met, though you might remember me better from the zoning board meetings where you opposed the multifamily housing development. Something about maintaining the neighborhood's character." Patricia's mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. The chat group notifications continued to buzz in her pocket, but she couldn't look away from Diana's steady gaze. "Officers," Diana continued, her tone shifting to what her staff called her policy voice, "I trust you verified my son's identification. Excellent. Then I suggest you return to actual police work." Diana Johnson had learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful moves in politics weren't the ones you planned. As camera crews jockeyed for position and reporters shouted questions, she did something unexpected. She walked onto Patricia Wheeler's pristine lawn and picked up 2 garden chairs from the patio set. "Ms. Wheeler," she called out, her voice carrying the same tone she used in town halls, "would you join me?" She positioned the chairs deliberately, not in confrontation, but in conversation, creating an intimate space in the middle of the media circus. "Let's talk about fear." The crowd inched closer, phones raised, as Patricia hesitated. Her carefully constructed world of neighborhood watch alerts and property values seemed to be crumbling under the weight of this moment. With trembling legs, she walked to the chair, hyper-aware of every camera tracking her movement. 15 years ago, Diana began, smoothing her skirt as she sat. "Before I was Mayor Johnson, I was just Diana, a new homeowner in Green Meadows." She gestured toward Marcus, who stood quietly nearby, his basketball now retrieved and held close. Marcus was 7 then. "The first week we moved in, someone called the police because he was playing in our own front yard." Patricia's hands twisted in her lap. The late afternoon sun caught her wedding ring, sending prisms dancing across her yoga pants. Diana noticed the nervous gesture and continued, her voice softening. "Tell me, Ms. Wheeler, what did you see when you looked out your window today?" The question hung in the air. Channel 8's Moonmic dipped lower. Lily Martinez's Instagram live count topped 50,000. Patricia swallowed hard, her real estate agent's polish cracking. I thought I saw a threat," Diana finished for her. "But what you actually saw was a 15-year-old AP student walking home from basketball practice, a boy who volunteers at the community center, A child who's grown up in this neighborhood, playing on these streets. She paused, letting each word land. My child. Officer Chen, still present but now standing back, touched her body camera unconsciously. This wasn't the confrontation she'd expected. Instead of anger, the mayor was offering something rarer, understanding tinged with accountability. When Marcus turned 13, Diana continued, her voice carrying to the hushed crowd. I had to teach him how to look non-threatening while walking to school, how to keep his hands visible in stores, how to respond to police without seeming aggressive. She leaned forward slightly. Ms. Wheeler, do you have children? A daughter, Patricia whispered. Emma. She's 12. Imagine teaching Emma that her very presence might frighten people, that she needs a strategy just to walk home safely. Diana's words carried no accusation, only a weight of lived experience. That's the conversation Black parents have been having with their children for generations. The gathering had grown larger, but the silence held. Even the reporters had lowered their microphones, caught in the gravity of the moment. Marcus watched his mother, recognizing the same quiet strength she'd shown at countless public forums, now deployed in defense of not just him, but every child who'd ever been seen as suspicious for simply existing. I don't. Patricia's voice cracked. I never meant. Tears welled in her eyes, but these weren't the tears of fear that had driven her to call 911. They were tears of recognition, of shame, of seeing clearly for perhaps the first time. Intent and impact often walk different paths, Diana said gently. But recognition, that's where change begins. She glanced at her son, then back to Patricia. What if, instead of calling the police, you had simply waved hello? Asked if he needed directions. Imagined for just a moment that he belonged here as much as you do. The questions weren't just for Patricia anymore. They rippled through the crowd, touching everyone who'd ever clutched their purse tighter, crossed the street, or made assumptions based on fear rather than fact. Diana had transformed a potential flashpoint into a moment of collective reflection. Rachel, still coordinating with City Hall, typed rapidly on her tablet. Cancel the crisis management team. Schedule a community forum instead. She recognized that look in the mayor's eye. This wasn't damage control anymore. This was Diana Johnson doing what she did best, building bridges in unexpected places. By sunset, #GreenMeadowsMoment had exploded across social media platforms. The video of Diana and Patricia's lawn chair summit, captured from multiple angles, was being shared by celebrities, civil rights activists, and news outlets nationwide. But it was Lily Martinez's raw Instagram live footage, with her whispered commentary and visible hands shaking, that resonated most deeply. I'm watching history happen in my neighborhood. In her home office, Diana fielded calls from national news networks while Marcus sat nearby, homework spread across her leather couch. CNN wanted an exclusive. MSNBC was offering a primetime slot. The New York Times had already drafted a feature piece titled, A Tale of Two Americas, When the Mayor's Son Can't Walk Home. Mom, Marcus called out between her calls. Trevor Noah just shared the video. He paused, reading from his phone. This is how you transform a moment of hatred into a lesson of humanity. He wants you on the show. Diana smiled tiredly, remembering similar offers after her historic election win. How's that AP history homework coming along? She asked instead. Ever the mother first, public figure second. The test hadn't disappeared just because their afternoon had gone viral. Across town, Patricia Wheeler sat in her darkened kitchen, her Earl Grey tea long forgotten. Her phone displayed hundreds of notifications, some condemning, others supportive, but most sharing their own stories of assumptions and awakening. Her daughter Emma's text glowed on the screen. Mom, everyone at school is talking about what happened. Are you okay? The question prompted tears that felt different from earlier, not from shame now, but from revelation. She typed back, I'm learning, honey. We all are. At City Hall, Rachel coordinated with the communications team as they crafted the official response. But Diana had already set the tone with her impromptu dialogue, making their usual careful messaging seem redundant. Instead, they focused on organizing what the mayor had proposed right there on Patricia's lawn, a town hall series called Walk With Me. The first announcement went out at 8 p.m. Join Mayor Diana Johnson for Walk With Me, a community conversation about bias, belonging, and building bridges, starting next week at the Green Meadows Community Center. All residents welcome. Marcus's basketball team was the first to respond. Their group chat exploded with ideas, culminating in a decision to show up wearing custom-made shirts. Coach Thompson helped design them. Simple white tees with "Hoops Not Hate" on the front and "Walk With Me, Green Meadows" on the back. Local businesses quickly joined the movement. The printing shop offered to make the shirts at cost. The coffee shop near Washington Prep promised free drinks for attendees. Even the conservative-leaning Chamber of Commerce issued a statement supporting the initiative. By midnight, the original incident had transformed into something larger than either Diana or Patricia could have anticipated. National civil rights organizations reached out offering support and resources. Educational consultants proposed bias training workshops. Real estate associations, Patricia's own professional community, requested speakers for their diversity panels. But it was the quiet moments that carried the most weight. Patricia, unable to sleep, drafted and redrafted an email to her neighborhood watch group. Today, I learned that safety isn't just about surveillance and suspicion. Sometimes it's about recognizing our own fears and choosing connection over panic. I'm stepping down as group coordinator to focus on making our neighborhood truly safe for everyone who calls it home. Meanwhile, in the mayor's house, Diana finally allowed herself to exhale. Marcus had fallen asleep on her office couch, his AP history textbook still open to the civil rights chapter. She covered him with the throw blanket kept there for late work nights, noting how young he looked in sleep. Too young to have become both victim and catalyst in the span of one afternoon. Her phone buzzed one final time for the night. It was a message from Patricia Wheeler. "Thank you for teaching instead of condemning. My door and my garden chairs are always open for more conversations." Diana looked at her sleeping son, then at the message. Sometimes, she thought, the most important political acts happen not in City Hall, but in front yards, over garden chairs, between neighbors brave enough to listen and learn. 3 months later, Marcus Johnson stood on the steps of the Green Meadows Community Center, surrounded by a diverse group of teenagers wearing matching neighborhood bridge builders hoodies. What had started as a response to crisis had evolved into something none of them had expected, a youth-led movement that was transforming their community from the ground up. "Okay, team," Marcus addressed the group, his voice carrying the quiet confidence he'd inherited from his mother. "Today's community patrol is partnering with Mrs. Wheeler's Garden Club. Remember, we're not just walking the neighborhood, we're building connections." Beside him, Emma Wheeler, Patricia's daughter, nodded, her tablet ready to document their latest initiative. The neighborhood bridge builders had become something of a local phenomenon. Their Instagram account, managed by Lily Martinez, had over 50,000 followers. Their TikTok challenges promoting community unity regularly went viral, with teens across the country replicating their Know Your Neighbor series and community connection campaigns. Inside the community center, Patricia Wheeler arranged refreshments for the post-patrol meeting. Her perfectly manicured nails now often carried traces of garden soil, a badge of honor from the community garden project she'd started. The same attention to detail that had once fueled her suspicions now powered weekly youth mentoring sessions and community outreach programs. "The cookies are from the new Haitian bakery on Maple," she explained to Diana, who'd stopped by between meetings. "Mary, the owner, is joining our business development committee." The irony wasn't lost on either woman. Just months ago, Patricia had opposed the zoning change that allowed the bakery to open. Diana watched through the window as Marcus led his group down Cedar Lane. The same street that had almost become a battlefield was now a training ground for change. Each Wednesday, the bridge builders conducted their unity walks, deliberately crossing invisible neighborhood boundaries and challenging long-held assumptions about who belonged where. Her phone buzzed. Another interview request. The Green Meadows story had become a case study in community transformation, but Diana had been selective about press coverage, preferring to let the kids take the lead. "It's their future," she told the Times reporter. "Let them shape the narrative." Marcus's group paused at each house, some teens taking photos for their digital neighborhood map project, others noting areas for their upcoming spring beautification initiative. Emma Wheeler's Front Yard Forums concept, inspired by her mother's garden chairs, had become a monthly event where neighbors gathered to discuss everything from property values to privilege. The police department had undergone its own transformation. Officer Chen now led sensitivity training sessions, using body camera footage from that day, with all parties' permission, to teach fellow officers about de-escalation and community engagement. Officer Reynolds had become a regular at bridge builders' meetings, not as security, but as a participant. Back at the community center, Patricia joined a video call with real estate agents nationwide, sharing her story as part of a new curriculum on bias in housing. Her voice no longer trembled when she described that October afternoon. "I thought I was protecting property values," she told them. "Instead, I was devaluing our community's greatest asset, its people." The meeting room filled as bridge builders returned from their patrol. Marcus checked his phone. Another text from Mom. "Proud of you. Don't forget the campaign dinner." Some things never changed. But as he looked around the room at former strangers now working together, Emma designing newsletters, Lily editing their latest video, Officer Chen chatting with kids who once feared police, he realized how much had. "Hey, Marcus," Emma called out, "should we announce the spring festival plans?" She pulled up the proposal on the projector. Green Meadows Unity Fair, where every neighbor belongs. Diana, preparing to leave for her next appointment, paused in the doorway. 3 months ago, she'd been ready to wage political war over her son's dignity. Instead, she'd witnessed him turn that moment into a movement. The teenagers around him weren't just planning a festival, they were redesigning their community's future. As she walked to her car, Diana passed the spot where Patricia's garden chairs had created an unlikely classroom. Now, similar chairs dotted front yards throughout Green Meadows, silent invitations to connect, to listen, to belong. Sometimes, she reflected, the most lasting changes didn't come from city hall mandates or policy reforms, but from children brave enough to build bridges where adults had built walls.